This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, maybe, for those of you who are listening to this training session. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Don Deasy, who is our specific trust directive specialist, someone who's been part of our the networking team for CSI Financial Group for quite some time now. But he has brought with him the years or decades of experience with regards to the integrated trust systems and the digitized estate planning platform that we have this exclusive opportunity with those advisor partners who we are working with. So with that, what I want to go ahead and do is I really want to set this up for everybody to understand. It's probably not going to take more than maybe 20 minutes here, but I'm going to have Don walk through what it is that he does with this step two, as you can see in the presentation. Step one, obviously the client initial intake form that's done from the advisor partner. When they do this, they then get onto Don's calendar and sets up their specific trust directives on his calendar. That process, what I'm going to hand over Don and let him walk through is exactly what happens in those, I guess we'll call it an interview, if we will, Don. And then from there, we can just go through any other questions or anything else that may arise. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Don Deasy. Don, welcome.
Thank you, Carter. And it's good to be here today and go through this process. So, yes, step two. So what happens in step one? Well, basically, that's the advisor initiates a transaction with a client, and he or she sets up their personal estate plan, which we call the estate plan. And then, which also includes in that process, by the way, collecting the fee and getting the client into the system so the client has their own cloud account, which we call the client council. The next step, my step two, is where I essentially, to give you an overview of what one sentence would be, is basically complete the process. That would be the process of getting the documents set up the way the client wants them. So let me just highlight exactly what I do. So the first thing would be I go over the data entry components and sort of, if you will, clean them up. Just make sure everything is done, spelling is right, that kind of thing. And then the next thing, and I find this to be the biggest concern that clients have, is explain what their distribution options mean. So typically a client will have a couple, 3 kids or something of that nature. So I make it clear, this is the people they want. Let's say there's 3 kids, 3 beneficiaries. And I say, okay, now here's what it means, that these assets are going to be distributed outright to each of your children. You know that you have other choices. And they'll say, what are those? And I'll say, essentially, rather than distributing the assets out, you can keep them in trust, and essentially an income would be paid out in lieu of a lump sum distribution. And there's many advantages for that, one of which is the assets that stay in trust are protected. They're going to be protected from creditor situation or possibly a divorce type of situation. Most clients really like that. They like the idea of having their assets protected. So although this is one of many specific trust directives, that would be the generation holding trust is what I just described, most people really like this, and they're very open to this idea. So we delve a little more deeply into the specifics and about the approximate size of the estate. And this normally brings up a second consideration, which is that in many, many cases today, people will have a good portion of their assets in qualified money, like an IRA or a 401k or some type of a pension plan. So I explained to them the other option that they have typically is they can have their assets that are qualified, i.e. IRA or 401k, flow through the trust to their beneficiary to assure that the beneficiary is going to get a minimum taxable occurrence because they're going to get an income based on their attained age, and that minimizes the taxes and maximizes the growth of the IRA, because in most cases, the payout to the beneficiary is going to be 1 to 2, possibly 3%. So over a period of time, if you're only getting 2 or 3% of the assets, it means the assets are going to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. So depending on the age of the beneficiary, this could be another legacy bonanza in a manner of speaking, because the IRA will get rather large over time.
Yeah, and Don, really what you're talking about there are the proper language that needs to be done with regards to see-through and then the stretch provisions is really what we're talking about there, right?
That's exactly what it is, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to interject to make sure that everybody understands that that's the other, part of this specific trust directive you're talking about that was designed and created specifically to have the proper language in order to actually facilitate the stretch provisions that are needed per IRS, codes and everything. So that's what I just wanted to make sure everybody knows, that we have addressed that issue with regards to qualified dollars.
And that's a very good comment you're making, Carter, because a lot of people think that, well, I'll just leave my IRA to my trust. And the reality is that most trusts, if they're not properly drafted, is giving people a limited choice. In other words, if you name your trust as the beneficiary and you don't have special IRS language in it, then the choice is going to be either a lump sum distribution or a payout over 5 years. When really what they want to do is what Carter just explained. They want to really stretch out the IRA. So the documents that we use, the estate plan document, has language in it that qualifies for the IRS regulations. So it is a qualified distribution IRA.
Perfect.
So that's how that works. Now, as a factor, or as a, not factual, but what happens in most of the times is what I just said. We talk about the money that would go from the qualified plan, which is the IRA distribution that Carter just mentioned, or the non-qualified, which would go into what we call the generation holding trust, where 5% is being paid out. That, in the majority of times, is what we do when we use the specific trust directives. However, there are over, I don't know, I think it's over 40, maybe it's as high as 50, because Gary keeps adding more specific trust directives. So it's very possible that there'd be some other situation a client may bring up, and these can be handled in mostly all cases by using another specific trust directive. So please feel comfortable with your clients when they have this interview, that we can pretty much assure them that we're going to customize that document to whatever their objectives are. Once that is done, the next step of this process is to make sure all the signatures that they would need to do are done, and this is done by using our e-signing technology. So we would not only e-sign the trust and the addendums to the trust documents and the other components that make up the estate plan, but we would be e-signing the advanced medical directives and the components for the funding, okay? So when we're done with the appointment, all e-signing areas of the estate plan in the client council will be e-signed. And this leads then to essentially one more thing that we're doing, and we're going, the step 2 would be now going to the funding kit, and we show them by a couple of examples. Typically, that would be the putting their house in the trust. We just show them how we list it, and typically we'll do a bank account or two. highlighting the fact that their other assets are typically financial assets. In other words, securities and investments and IRAs and retirement plans. And so we then focus on the fact that you, the advisor, are going to come back in and you're going to assist them with this. And the last thing we do then is we show them there are a couple of forms. They're called the Master Signatory Guarantor Form, or MSG for short, that need to be signed and notarized. If it's a single person, it's only one form. If it's a couple, each husband and wife need to sign the MSG form, and there's an additional disclaimer or disclosure form that says that both people know anyone, that either one of them can go into the account. And we complete the process by using and sending a follow-up email over or just doing an overview of what we did and showing them how to get back into their account and how they can see the different components that we went through. And that email goes to the advisor as well as the client. And that pretty much completes the process. And then the next step is going to be the step where there's going to be some client training. So with that being said, I'll open this up to you, Carter, for any questions that you might have or any clarification of what I might have said.
Yeah, let me just what I want to do is I just want to kind of sort of summarize everything we just got through talking about. Because we have this seamless proprietary process, maybe what you can do is you can share some of your experience on how the interactions have worked with these clients and how well they love the fact that they know exactly they're going to be working with the client, then they're going to work with you for that specific language. Everybody has their proper execution that they want to have done. You're going to handle all of that, answer all their questions. Then they're going to get to do the client training with Stacy or her team that she has. And then they're going to really be able to take ownership and understand the navigation through that. And then on the back end, that's where our network attorney will come in and basically rubber stamp everything we've done on the front end. But what I would like for you to kind of sort of share with those who are listening to this is that how's the reaction and the interaction been with these clients that you are assisting in this most important step of their getting their affairs in order?
Let me give you an actual quote I just did. We had delayed the beginning of this particular session because I was on an appointment with a client, and we finished it, and she said this. She said, "Thank you. This was painless. I was expecting it to be a lot more complicated." That sentiment is typical of what most people say when they go through this, because there's a sort of a out there a thought process that, doing the estate plan is difficult and time consuming and tedious, and they're just very, very pleased that this whole process can get done typically under an hour, and they know that what they want to do. Now, in many cases, at the beginning of the session, they weren't quite sure how that was going to work, but they had certain ideas of what they wanted to have happen. And when we complete the session, there's a great sense of comfort, a peace of mind, if you will, because they say, "Oh, that's it. That's all I got to do." And I'm saying, "Yep, that's it." And then, as Carter just said, the backup sessions to my session will be a clarification of certain functionality of the client counsel, which Stacy does, and she does a wonderful job. And then the attorneys coming in and basically validating it and making them say, "Yep, I'm the attorney. Here's, everything is fine, and we're all set to go." So is that what you're looking for? Is that what you?
Yeah, that's absolutely ideal. The last little bit that I would like for you to discuss and share just a little bit is with regards to like next steps for the clients that you follow through. You've got some documents I know that you attach. You do the certificate of trust that you attach, and it's really meant to be pretty elementary of like what next steps are. You give them a nice track to run on. What part or what role do you feel like you play in with helping them with their advanced medical directives? And I think that's maybe the last thing that I really wanted to discuss today, because I wanted to keep this at about 20 minutes anyway.
Okay, so let me go back and reiterate. When we do send that follow-up email, we want to accomplish several objectives. One, we want to let the client know how they can come back into their account and how they can go see their documents and how they can go back and see the funding section so they can get prepared for their meeting with the advisor. What happens is repetition is very important here because, they're being exposed to a system that is really very simple, but it just may be a little bit more detailed, if you will, for them. So a couple of repetitive sessions helps them to understand it. So that's the key thing right there. And then secondly, we want to make sure that there's very minimal signatures involved here. So the only thing that needs to be done is the MSG form. That's the Master Signature Guarantor form. What that is, actually, it's a form that's we created, and it acknowledges all the e-signing events. And we've discovered that having that form signed, physically signed and notarized, is there not because we need it legally, but administratively, because maybe the guy at the bank down the street or the gal, when the client passes on, is not going to, will say, well, we don't know about electronic signatures. So the form says, fine, I've signed everything and I physically acknowledge that I've done it. So that's a very important thing. And then, of course, the disclosure form if there are a couple. But other than that, and Carter mentioned that we just started adding the certificate of trust. The certificate of trust is a 5-page summary of their estate plan that can be given to an entity. And typically, because we're only assigning assets, okay, we really don't need that except if you're going to change a beneficiary. So if you're going to change a beneficiary, which is appropriate in many cases, say life insurance or your IRA, you want to have the trust be the contingent beneficiary for an IRA and basically a primary beneficiary for life insurance. And you can do that in the funding kit, but because it's a beneficiary arrangement, technically that's a contract between the entity and the client. We have to take a second step and do a change of beneficiary with the entity. And the certificate of trust proves to them that you have the trust and all that. So essentially, once they get this email, they've got everything they need in terms of the forms to complete the process, to have all the documents be done, and they're all set to go.
Yeah. So all I want to touch on, and I think we can wind it down. That was perfect, Don. Thank you for that. And I know that I've gotten lots of feedback from the advisor partners we work with that the clients absolutely they reinforce exactly what you just got through saying. That was so much easier and so less painful than I was expecting it to be. So I appreciate your professionalism in that. The last thing that I just wanted to mention with regards to the e-signatures, what everybody needs to understand is this is a congressionally recognized application. Let me repeat that. A congressionally recognized application. So, and we can get more into detail with that. We've got obviously all the white papers to, to reinforce and kind of sort of educate everybody on that. But with all that being said, Don, thank you very much for your time today. I think we kept this right at about 20 minutes. So we are coming up on the end of the year. In fact, today is the last official business day of 2018. As a little bit of a timestamp on this recording. So everybody have a happy new year, and we look forward to 2019. For Don Deasy, this is Carter Wilcoxon, CEO and founder of CSI Financial Group. Thank you all very much for your time, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.